At 9:30 a.m. on October 15th, 1944, Aachen, Germany, a sergeant from the 26th Infantry Regiment was lying on his stomach in the rubble of what used to be a bakery, watching his men die one at a time on Wilhelmstrasse. The street ahead was completely empty. No movement, no sound, just cobblestones and autumn leaves, and the kind of silence that meant death was waiting. Two of his soldiers were lying in the gutter 30 yards forward. One was face down, not moving. The other was trying to crawl back toward American lines, dragging himself forward with his elbows, leaving a trail of blood on the stones. Every few seconds he would move a foot, then stop, then move again. The sergeant wanted to help him, wanted to send someone forward with a med kit, wanted to do anything except lie here watching a man bleed to death in the street. But the moment anyone moved into that kill zone, the German machine gun opened fire. The gun was positioned somewhere in the buildings ahead, maybe second floor, maybe third. The sergeant could not see it, could not locate it, could only watch the tracers snap down Wilhelmstrasse and know that whoever was behind that gun had perfect coverage of the entire approach and all the time in the world to wait. This was urban warfare in October 1944, and it was nothing like the training manuals said it would be. The manuals talked about combined arms, about tanks supporting infantry, about artillery softening targets before assault. But the reality of fighting in a German city was that none of that worked the way it was supposed to. Tanks could not maneuver in narrow streets filled with rubble. Artillery could bring down buildings, but could not kill defenders hiding in basements 3 stories underground. And infantry without tank support was just meat for German machine guns positioned in buildings that American rifles could not touch. Aachen was the first German city Allied forces had attempted to capture. It was an ancient place over 1,000 years old, birthplace of Charlemagne, site where 32 German emperors had been crowned. The city held enormous symbolic value for Nazi Germany. Adolf Hitler had declared it would be defended to the last man. He had personally ordered that Aachen be incorporated into the Siegfried Line, the massive defensive network running along Germany's western border, consisting of bunkers, tank traps, and minefields stretching for miles. The German garrison defending Aachen was commanded by Colonel Gerhard Wilk, an experienced officer who understood urban warfare intimately. He had approximately 5,000 combat troops, plus another 1,000 Volkssturm militia. They had spent weeks preparing the city for defense, fortifying every substantial building, blocking streets with rubble, mining intersections, creating interlocking fields of fire that covered every approach. The narrow streets denied American tanks the maneuver room they needed. The thick-walled brick buildings absorbed artillery fire that would have destroyed wooden structures. The underground cellars and sewers provided protected routes for defenders to move between positions without exposing themselves to American observation. The 1st Infantry Division, the famous Big Red one, had been fighting for this city since October 2nd. 2 weeks of brutal house-to-house combat that consumed men and ammunition at rates that made logistics officers back in Paris sick with worry. The division had taken over 1,350 casualties so far. The 26th Infantry Regiment had been reduced to 2 functioning battalions instead of the standard 3. Companies that started the battle with 190 men were down to 80 or fewer. Platoons that should have had 40 soldiers were operating with 15, and they were still fighting for every street, every building, every room. The Americans had tried everything the Doctrine manuals recommended. They had used tanks, but the narrow, rubble-filled streets channeled the Shermans into kill zones where German Panzerfaust teams could hit them from basement windows. They had used artillery, but the massive preliminary bombardments that preceded every assault just created more rubble for Germans to hide in. They had used tank destroyers, but the limited fields of fire in urban terrain negated their range advantage. The fighting came down to infantry with rifles and grenades, trying to clear buildings one room at a time, against defenders who knew every angle, every hiding spot, every position that gave them advantage. The strategic objective was simple: capture Aachen and open the route to Cologne and the Rhine River, prove that German cities could fall, show the German people that their fortified homeland was not impregnable. But the tactical reality was that urban combat consumed resources faster than the army could replace them. Every block cost lives, every building required fire support, and the fire support they needed was not arriving. I spent 6 hours researching and writing this script to show you exactly how the M15 combination gun motor carriage worked, why it was banned from close urban support, and how one crew's decision to drive their half-track directly into a kill zone changed American doctrine for urban warfare and saved an entire regiment when every expert said it could not be done. If this story matters to you, hit subscribe right now. That is it. Just subscribe. Thank you. While the infantry of the 26th Regiment was dying on Wilhelmstrasse, 3 blocks behind American lines, an M15 combination gun motor carriage sat parked in the shadow of a destroyed church, engine idling, pointing its guns at empty sky. The M15 was an unusual vehicle, built on an M3 half-track chassis. It had wheels in front for steering, and tracks in the rear for mobility over broken ground. But what made it distinctive was the weapon mount in the open cargo bed. The M15 carried one 37mm M1A2 automatic cannon, flanked by 2 50-caliber M2 Browning heavy machine guns in a combination mount protected by an armored shield. The 37mm was an autocannon, meaning it fired automatically as long as the trigger was held and ammunition was available. Rate of fire was 120 rounds per minute sustained. Each shell was about the size of a beer bottle, packed with high explosive and a contact fuse. The weapon had been designed for a specific purpose, shooting down German aircraft. The Luftwaffe bombers and dive bombers that had terrorized Allied forces in 1940 and 1941 had been countered by weapons exactly like the M15. The combination of the rapid-fire 37mm and the heavy machine guns could fill the sky with enough metal that hitting an aircraft became almost guaranteed. The 50-caliber tracers would walk onto the target, and then the 37mm would finish it with high-explosive shells that could tear a wing off a bomber. By October 1944 in Aachen, there were no German aircraft to shoot at. The Luftwaffe was effectively destroyed as a fighting force in Western Europe. German aircraft rarely appeared over the battlefield. When they did appear, they were shot down so quickly that anti-aircraft crews barely had time to traverse their weapons. The M15 crews spent their days maintaining guns they never fired, sitting in rear positions, listening to the sound of infantry fighting and dying without them. The crew consisted of 4 men. The gunner sat in the center of the mount, controlling traverse and elevation with hand wheels. The loader stood behind him, ready to feed ammunition clips into the 37mm. 2 more crew members handled ammunition supply and vehicle driving. They were anti-aircraft specialists, trained for months on aircraft recognition, tracking fast-moving targets, and calculating lead angles. They were not trained for urban ground combat. The doctrine was explicit. The M15 was an anti-aircraft weapon. Using it for ground support was prohibited. The reasoning was tactical and practical. The vehicle was too valuable and too vulnerable to risk near front lines where German anti-tank weapons could destroy it. The open-topped design meant the crew was exposed to grenades, mortars, and plunging fire from buildings. The 37mm shells were designed for thin aircraft aluminum, not for bunker busting. The experts had analyzed it thoroughly and concluded the M15 would be ineffective and wasteful in ground combat. The infantry hated this logic with burning intensity. They called the M15 the barn door because its high profile and open top made it an obvious target. They called it the parade float because it sat in rear areas looking impressive while doing nothing useful. Most of all, they hated watching it sit idle with hundreds of rounds of 37mm ammunition while they died trying to take buildings with rifles and grenades. At 10 o'clock a.m., the gunner was monitoring the infantry radio frequency. Not officially, not with authorization. But when you sit on a weapon that could help, and you listen to men dying 3 blocks away, you start breaking small rules. The voice that came over the radio was calm, but underneath the professionalism was desperation. This is Baker Company, 26th Infantry. We are pinned on Wilhelmstrasse by machine gun fire from fortified building. Cannot advance, cannot flank. Requesting immediate fire support. Any available direct fire weapon. We have wounded in the street we cannot evacuate. Need help now. Over. The gunner looked at his loader. Neither spoke. They were anti-aircraft artillery. They were not authorized to respond to infantry calls. Their weapon was specifically banned from urban ground support. But they were also Marines sitting on the most powerful direct-fire weapon within 3 miles while men died because nobody would help them. The gunner made a decision. He keyed the radio. Baker Company, this is Mobile Unit 3 blocks south. We have 37mm autocannon and twin 50s. We can provide direct fire support. Mark your position. Over. There was a pause. Then, this is Baker Company. What unit are you? Over. The gunner hesitated. Anti-aircraft artillery. M15 half-track. We are not authorized for ground support, but we are volunteering. Mark your front line, and we will engage targets beyond it. This is your call. Over. The silence lasted 5 seconds. Then, this is Baker Company. Get here immediately, marking position with red smoke. Target is 4-story brick building, corner of Wilhelmstrasse and Hubertusstrasse. Machine gun 2nd or 3rd floor. For God's sake, hurry. Over. The driver dropped into gear without waiting for orders. The M15 lurched forward out of cover and onto the street leading toward the fighting. The gunner began checking systems. Hydraulic traverse pressure good. Guns loaded. Ammunition ready. He traversed left and right, testing response. The mount moved smoothly. He elevated the guns upward, then depressed them toward ground level. This was the moment that violated regulations. The M15 could aim at ground targets, but Doctrine said the weapon was ineffective for this purpose. The 37mm was designed to explode on contact with thin aircraft metal. Experts claimed it would be useless against masonry buildings. The gunner looked at the 37mm barrel and made his own assessment. A shell that could tear the wing off a bomber could probably do some damage to brick. The drive forward took 8 minutes through streets choked with rubble. They passed infantry moving back with wounded, medics working on casualties in doorways, ammunition bearers struggling with crates. Every soldier who saw the M15 moving forward stopped and stared. Anti-aircraft half-tracks did not go to the front line. What they were seeing was impossible. At 10:15 a.m., the M15 emerged onto Wilhelmstrasse, 2 blocks behind Baker Company's position. The gunner could see the red smoke marking friendly positions. Beyond it, he could see the target building, 4 stories of dark brick with shuttered windows. The structure dominated the street intersection, its corner position giving perfect fields of fire in 3 directions. The sergeant from Baker Company crawled back through rubble to meet them. His face was covered in brick dust, and dried blood from a shrapnel cut across his forehead. He pointed at the target building. Machine gun is in there. 2nd or 3rd floor, we cannot tell which. Maybe more than 1 gun, we have tried everything. Rifle fire just chips the brick. Bazooka team tried to get close enough for a shot and both men were killed. We need that building gone. The gunner studied the target. Range approximately 250 yards. Elevation slight. The building was solid construction, probably 2 feet of brick at the corners. The windows were narrow and shuttered. Perfect defensive position. He made a decision that would later appear in field manuals as an example of tactical innovation. He decided not to aim at the machine gun. He decided to aim at the building itself. He traversed the mount until the 37mm was pointed directly at the corner of the structure, where 2 walls met. Not at a window. Not at the roof. At the corner where the structural integrity of the entire building was concentrated. He elevated slightly to aim at the 2nd floor where the brick was oldest and weathered. The loader fed a 10-round clip into the 37mm autoloader. The heavy steel clip clicked into place. The gun was ready. The gunner wrapped his hands around the firing controls. He pressed the trigger and held it down. The M15 began firing with a mechanical rhythm that sounded like a jackhammer. Thump, 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 thump. The 37mm fired at exactly 2 rounds per second. The recoil rocked the entire half-track backward with each shot. Orange muzzle flash erupted from the barrel. Spent shell casings the size of soda cans flew from the ejection port and clattered onto the street. The first shell hit the brick corner at the 2nd floor level. The explosion was louder than anyone expected. The shell did not just chip the brick, it excavated it. A chunk of masonry the size of a microwave disappeared from the wall. The 2nd shell hit 6 inches to the right. Another chunk gone, the 3rd shell, 4th shell, 5th shell, all hitting within a 2-foot circle, systematically demolishing the corner of the building. The gunner kept firing. The loader slammed in another clip without waiting for orders. Thump, 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 thump. The corner of the building was not just damaged, it was being disassembled brick by brick. The high-explosive shells designed for aircraft were working perfectly against 19th century masonry. Each explosion pulverized brick and mortar, turning solid construction into rubble and dust. After 30 seconds of sustained fire, the gunner had put 60 rounds into the same corner. 60 37mm high-explosive shells, each one packed with enough TNT to shred aircraft aluminum, all concentrated on a 2-foot circle of 19th century brickwork. The structural damage was catastrophic and cumulative. Each explosion weakened the mortar, holding the bricks together. Each impact created microfractures that spread through the masonry. The corner that had supported 2 walls and 4 floors of building was now a jagged crater, exposing the interior structure of timber beams and floor joists. The building began to fail. The physical process was visible even through the dust and smoke. The second floor sagged as its support disappeared. Weight that had been distributed across the corner was now concentrated on weakened sections that could not bear it. The third floor dropped 6 inches as floor joists lost their anchorage. The entire corner section of the structure, approximately 20 feet wide and 4 stories tall, collapsed inward with a roar of falling brick and timber that could be heard 3 blocks away. The collapse created a cascading failure. Interior walls that had relied on the exterior corner for support came down. Floor sections that had been stable pancaked on top of each other. Dust and debris erupted from every window as the building's interior was crushed by its own weight. The machine gun position that had been firing from the second floor disappeared into the collapse. The gun, the ammunition, the crew, the entire defensive position was buried under tons of brick and wooden beams. The German fire stopped instantly, not suppressed, not forced to relocate, eliminated permanently. American infantrymen watching from cover could not believe what they had just seen. A fortified building that had withstood rifle fire, bazooka rockets, and 155mm artillery shells had been brought down in 30 seconds by a weapon that was supposedly designed only for shooting at aircraft. The psychological impact was immediate. If the M15 could do that to one building, it could do it to any building. The German defensive positions that had seemed impregnable suddenly looked vulnerable. The gunner lifted off the trigger. The M15 fell silent. The sudden absence of noise was shocking. His hands were cramped from gripping the controls. The smell of burned propellant hung in the air like fog. He looked at Wilhelmstrasse, where the target building had been. The corner was gone, replaced by a pile of rubble and a cloud of grey dust that was slowly settling over the street. Subscribe right now, because what you are about to hear is how this one engagement led to the M15 fighting through an entire German counterattack, a duel with a German anti-tank gun that should have killed the entire crew, and a change in urban warfare doctrine that saved thousands of American lives in the next 6 months of fighting. This is the only channel showing you the real decisions and innovations that won battles while headquarters were still arguing about regulations. Do not miss what happens next. Infantry from Baker Company were standing up from their positions. They were moving forward carefully, weapons ready, checking the rubble pile that used to be a defensive position. The sergeant who had guided them to the target walked over to the M15. He did not say thank you. He did not say anything. He just looked at the gunner and nodded once. That was enough. But the engagement was not over. The sound of the 37mm firing had been heard across the entire sector. German defenders knew exactly where the American fire support was positioned. 2 blocks east, a German anti-tank gun crew was already moving their Pak 40 75mm weapon into position behind a pile of rubble that gave them a clear line of sight down Wilhelmstrasse. The Pak 40 was a dedicated tank killer. Its 75mm armor-piercing shells could penetrate 4 inches of steel at 1,000 yards. Against the M15's thin armor and open top, it was absolutely lethal. One hit anywhere on the half-track would kill the crew and destroy the vehicle. At 10:20 a.m., the Pak-40 fired its first shot. The sound was different from anything else on the battlefield, a deep, heavy crack that announced a weapon designed to kill armor at long range. The armor-piercing shell passed so close to the M15 that the gunner felt the pressure wave slap his face like a physical blow. The air itself seemed to split open. The shell hit the cobblestones 20 feet beyond the half-track and ricocheted upward at a shallow angle, screaming over the rooftops with a sound like tearing metal. The gunner spun the traverse wheel hard, swinging the 37mm toward the muzzle flash he had seen from the Parquet 40 position 2 blocks east. This was a duel the M15 should not survive by any rational calculation. The German Pak 40 was one of the most effective anti-tank weapons in the Wehrmacht arsenal. Its 75mm gun fired armor-piercing shells at over 2,500 feet per second, with enough kinetic energy to penetrate 4 inches of hardened steel at 1,000 yards. The gun crew was protected by a heavy shield that could stop machine gun fire and shell fragments. They had range, penetration, protection, and the tactical advantage of a prepared position. The M15 had thin armor that could barely stop rifle bullets. The open top meant the crew was exposed to anything that came in from above or the sides. The 37mm gun was designed for aircraft with aluminum skin, not for dueling with weapons designed to kill tanks. The half-track was sitting completely exposed in the middle of the street, with nowhere to hide and no armor to protect it. By every tactical calculation, the German crew should reload, aim carefully, and destroy the M15 with their second shot. But the M15 had one advantage the German crew had not considered and could not match. It could fire faster than the Germans could reload. The Parquet 40 was a manually loaded weapon. Each shell weighed 15 pounds. The loader had to grab it from the ready rack, lift it, push it into the breech, and close the breech block. The gunner had to reacquire aim after the recoil displaced the weapon. Even a well-trained crew needed at least 8 seconds between shots. The M15's 37mm autocannon fired 2 rounds per second for as long as ammunition lasted. The gunner did not try to penetrate the Pak 40's gun shield. Instead, he aimed the twin 50 calibers directly at it and opened fire. The heavy machine guns hammered the shield with armor-piercing rounds at 1,100 rounds per minute combined. The bullets sparked off the steel, creating a shower of fragments and ricochets. The German gun crew flinched back from the impacts. Their aim wavered. The reload that should have taken 5 seconds took 8. The gunner switched to the 37mm. He aimed not at the shield, but at the pile of rubble the Germans were using for cover. He held the trigger down. Thump, 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 thump. The high-explosive shells slammed into the rubble, detonating on impact, throwing bricks and debris into the air. The German crew was not behind armor anymore. They were behind cover that was being systematically demolished. The Pak 40 fired again. This time the shot went wide, hitting a building wall 30 feet to the left. The German gunner was firing blind through smoke and dust, while taking machine gun fire directly on his position. The third shot missed even wider. The fourth shot did not come. The German crew abandoned their weapon and retreated through the rubble, leaving the 75mm gun silent and unmanned. The M15 had survived a duel it should have lost by refusing to fight it on the enemy's terms. Instead of trading armor-piercing shots with a weapon designed to kill tanks, the crew had used speed, volume of fire, and the unique combination of weapons they possessed to win through overwhelming firepower at close range. For the next 2 hours, the M15 remained on Wilhelmstrasse, providing fire support to Baker Company as they cleared buildings block by block. Every time German defenders tried to set up a position, the 37mm engaged it. Machine gun nests were destroyed, fortified rooms were demolished, sniper positions were eliminated. The gun fired over 400 rounds that morning, systematically taking apart defensive positions that infantry could not reach with rifles and grenades. At noon, American artillery finally arrived to support the advance. With proper fire support available, the M15 pulled back. The half-track was a mess. The front armor was pockmarked with bullet strikes. The shields were dented from fragments. The gun barrel was too hot to touch. The weapon had been pushed beyond its design limits. The crew was in similar condition. The gunner's hands were blistered. The loader's arms were bruised from handling heavy ammunition clips. All 4 men were deaf from sustained fire. But they were alive, and so was Baker Company. What happened next was predictable, but also revealing. An officer from the anti-aircraft battalion arrived within an hour. He saw the M15 sitting in the street covered in brick dust and cordite residue. He saw the pile of spent shell casings. He calculated the cost of 400 rounds of 37mm ammunition. He began writing charges for unauthorized use of anti-aircraft assets. Then Lieutenant Colonel John T. Corley arrived. He was commanding the 3rd Battalion, 26th Infantry Regiment. He had been monitoring radio traffic all morning. He had heard Baker Company's desperate calls. He had heard the M15 crew respond. He had watched his regiment advance 2 blocks in 2 hours after being stalled for 2 days. He walked around the half-track, studying the impact marks, the spent casings, the warped barrel. He looked at the anti-aircraft officer. He said quietly, "This half-track did more to advance my battalion this morning than an entire artillery battalion did yesterday. The building that had my men pinned for 6 hours is gone. The PaK-40 that killed 3 of my tank destroyers is abandoned. My casualties today are half what they were yesterday, because this crew gave my men fire support when nobody else would." He asked the officer how much the ammunition cost. The officer said approximately $2,000. Corley asked him to calculate the cost of replacing the 80 men his battalion would have lost taking that building without fire support. The officer closed his notebook. The charges were dropped. Within days, the story spread through the 1st Infantry Division. Other anti-aircraft units began moving forward to support infantry in Aachen's brutal urban fighting. The ban on using M15s for ground support was quietly lifted. By November 1944, M15 half-tracks were routinely deployed with frontline infantry, specifically for urban combat missions. The tactics improvised on Wilhelmstrasse became Doctrine. The M15's combination of rapid-fire cannon and heavy machine guns proved ideal for urban warfare. The 37mm could demolish fortified positions. The 50 calibers could suppress defenders and engage targets the cannon could not reach. The open-top design that experts said was a fatal weakness became an advantage because the crew could see threats from all directions in complex urban terrain. The M15 served in this role through the rest of the war. It fought in the Hürtgen forest. It fought during the Battle of the Bulge. It fought in the final advance to the Rhine. The weapon that experts said was useless for ground combat became one of the most requested fire support assets in urban warfare. The gunner survived the war. He went home and never talked much about Aachen. When people asked what he did in the war, he said he was in anti-aircraft artillery. They assumed he spent the war looking at empty sky. He never corrected them. He did not need recognition. He needed to know that Baker Company survived and Aachen fell, and maybe sometimes the experts are wrong and the soldiers in the field are right. Subscribe to this channel right now and turn on all notifications, because next week we are breaking down 3 more weapons that soldiers used in ways headquarters banned. Every single week we show you the field innovations that won battles while officers argued about doctrine. This is not entertainment. This is education you will not find anywhere else. Thank you for watching, and thank you for understanding that sometimes the most valuable thing a soldier can do is ignore the experts and break the rules when lives are on the line. The crew who violated every regulation and drove their half-track into a kill zone saved more lives that day than any regulation ever could. The manual was written by people who were not there. They were there. They made the choice people who were not there could not make. Hit subscribe right now, then hit like so YouTube shows this to more people who need to understand that military innovation comes from necessity. Drop a comment telling us where you are watching from and what forgotten weapon you want covered next. This community is worldwide and you are part of keeping these stories alive.